Good evening, America. Rabbi Block here on our Wednesday Night Live. And thank you for joining me and those of you who are watching. And this will become a podcast. So thank you for those who are listening. I've done topics on and off with different kinds of results. I'm going to continue with topics, and I will pay attention to the questions. Indeed, if you want to ask me questions about Judaism and not just like to hear yourself say something or throw barbs at me. I have a 3-part series I put together. I thought of calling it History Lied to Us, but history never lied to us. More accurately, our view of history is mainly from the media, TV and movies. And so I would like to present the myths we believe because Hollywood said so. And there's no one really to blame. It's just that we have to stop for a minute. That when I pause, I'm actually reading what people are writing because I do want to answer. Now, picture a Viking warrior. Big guy, right? Huge beard. And on his head, a helmet with horns. Now picture a cowboy out on the range. Strong, rugged, the Marlboro Man. Sun on his face, and what's on his head? A big, wide brim, 10-gallon hat. Now Napoleon. A little guy with his hand tucked inside his coat. But here's the thing, and this is what we have to be careful, because, and I'll explain some more things later, but we're very susceptible to what people present to us in the movies, in the media, and on TikTok. So I'm going to spend 3 parts looking at the media and what we believe. History lied to us in a way. So let's start with our Viking friends. No Viking warrior ever wore a horned helmet into battle. Not one, not a single documented one. What have archaeologists actually found? Viking helmets were simple. Iron leather caps, rounded at the top. Perhaps a nose guard. Practical, designed to keep the skull intact. That's it. So where did this horned business come from? And it's one of my favorite stories in history. In 1876, a German composer named Richard Wagner created Der Rings des Nibelungen, the Ring Cycle. It's legendary. It was a massive production. And the costume designer, Karl Doppler, designed horned helmets for the Viking-inspired candidates. Now, those helmets were made total visual for the opera. They're dramatic. They're theatrical. And these horns said under the lights, "Oh, I'm a warrior. I'm a Viking warrior from the north." But unfortunately, that image escaped the theater. Within a generation, illustrators, novelists, filmmakers grabbed that image and ran with it. By the time Hollywood got hold of it in the 20th century, the horned Viking was cemented as a fact. One opera, one costume designer, hundreds of years of misinterpretation. Now, the Talmud has this concept. There are multiple valid readings of a text, but it also warns you something very different about stories that feel true because they're vivid and dramatic. They're not. And how can we make the performance... Why? No. Wagner's opera wasn't trying to deceive anyone about history. It was art. But the line between artistic representation and historical fact got completely erased along the way. And that's what I want to ask us. How often does that happen to us today? How many things do we know because we saw them on TikTok? We saw them in a movie. We read them in a novel. We heard them from somebody on cable news who seemed authentic. Vikings didn't wear horns, but we believe that because someone put it on the stage and it looked true. Our first warning, our first example, to be careful. Be really careful. I'm going to glance down. I kind of like the nonsensical questions people ask me. Not about Judaism, not about wanting to know the topic. It's kind of fun that people just want to put things in and then they go on to another screen. Okay, if that works for you. The cowboy and his hat. Actually, another one of my favorites. The Marlboro Man. The quintessential symbol of rugged individualism, freedom, the frontier. And what's on the cowboy's head? A 10-gallon hat. The wide brim, how high-croned, beauty that says, I am the American West. Politicians wear them. Presidents wear them. LBJ had a whole thing with it. It screams American. But what actually happened with this hat? Now, let's start with the name. A 10-gallon hat? Do you really think it means it holds 10 gallons of water? Come on. Maybe you've even sold an old Stetson advertisement that shows a cowboy drinking water out of his hat. The hat holds maybe 3 or 4 quarts. That's it. Not 10 gallons. Not even close. 10 gallons would weigh over 80 pounds. You couldn't wear that. So where does this 10-gallon hat come from? It's a direct borrowing from the Spanish. Spanish vaqueros, the original cowboys, literally invented cattle ranching in North America. They wore sombreros with decorative braided headbands called golans. A grand hat enough to have 10 headbands was called, Diaz Golan sombrero. So American cowboys heard the word galon and thought, he's saying gallon. And there it is. And by the way, when the doughboys during the First World War were in France, actually Belgium, they had these great fries. And they said, we must be in France. They're French fries. They never were French fries. They were Belgian fries. Same thing here with a 10-gallon hat. Here's the thing. We almost never talk about the American cowboy as we imagine him. That whole aesthetic is largely borrowed from the vaqueros, the Spanish. Where does rodeo come from? Spanish. Lasso, Spanish. Ranch, Spanish. Bronco, Spanish. Stampede, Spanish. The skills, the tools, the vocabulary of the American cowboy came from the Mexican cattle workers who had been doing this job for generations, before Anglo settlers ever arrived. Realistically, real cowboys in the 19th century wore all kinds of hats. Derby hats, flat caps, Civil War hats. They wore whatever they had. The 10-gallon hat, as the cowboy hat, became iconic because of the Wild West shows, dime novels, and early Hollywood cinema. Buffalo Bill Cody. He was a statesman, a genius at spectacle. His Wild West shows in the 1880s and 90s played to packed houses across America and Europe. He understood branding before branding was a concept. The oversized hat became a symbol, part of a costume. And then Hollywood took over. And every single actor playing a cowboy wore the hat. The hat became the man became the myth. And if you like, watch more modern movies of the American West. You'll never see a 10-gallon hat. You'll never see a cowboy hat on anyone. You'll see bowlers, flat caps, Civil War hats. Because now American movies have caught up with being more historic and accurate. But it's not just us that got the hat wrong. It's that in making the myth of the American cowboy purely Anglo, purely American, we have completely erased the Mexican culture that built the thing. The vaquero became invisible. The Mexican craftsman, the Spanish horseman, the indigenous knowledge that shaped the plains got brushed aside, airbrushed, if you will. And we read in the sayings of the fathers, Pirkei Avot, do not judge your fellow until you have reached his place. And what this means for us is don't tell someone's story until you've actually heard his or her story. Because the story we told about the cowboy left a lot of people out of their own history. I'm receiving more guests of people that want to co-host with me. I say this every week, but not a single one of you has ever sent me an email at rabbiblog.com and agreed to co-host with me. Not a single one of you. Please be the first. Let's co-host together. Napoleon. A little short guy. In fact, it's called the Napoleon Complex. A short person overcompensates with aggressive and ambitious behavior. Look, it's in the dictionary. Napoleon was not short. He wasn't. He died in 1821. The official record of his height was, in French units, 5'2". When you convert this into modern measurement, he was about 6 feet 7 inches, above average for the average Frenchman. So where did this come from? There was a measurement mix-up. French inches were longer than British inches. Remember, there's no standard measurement. So when British physicians recorded Napoleon's height using French units without converting them, the number 5'2" landed in English records and English ears as short. It was a unit of conversion error that became mythology. Next, there was a British political cartoonist named James Gillray. He was the most influential political satirist of his day. He spent years drawing Napoleon as short. The cartoons were everywhere. They were brilliant. Napoleon himself once said about Gilray, the artist, he did more than all the armies of Europe to bring me down. Think about that. A cartoonist did what armies couldn't. Wartime propaganda became cultural fact. The cartoon became bibliography. And 2 centuries later, we still have the Napoleon complex in the dictionary as someone very short. So, here's the Jewish teaching. Proverbs. The first to plead his case, seems right, until another comes along and cross-examines him. In other words, and this is a lesson for us on TikTok, the first story wins, not because it's true, because it got there first. And that's a caveat, a warning. Be very careful. When you see something on TikTok that someone posts as the first thing, find out what's going on. Wait for the other things. Napoleon's British enemies understood something about human nature. You can control the image, then you will control the narrative. And once a narrative is established, and think about all the narratives out there, think about all the things here on TikTok, FaceTime, YouTube, the first story wins. And, you certainly can accept it, but know that you're falling into a trap. Always ask, who told the story? And what do they want me to believe? Marie Antoinette. Let them eat cake. 4 words. One of the most famous quotes in Western history. The symbol of royal indifference to human suffering. This sentence proved that Marie Antoinette deserved having her head chopped off. Unfortunately, she never said it. In fact, the quote predates her by over a century. Jacques Cousteau recorded a phrase in his Confessions. Marie Antoinette was just a child in Austria, years before she ever set foot in France. The quote was attributed to a great princess. Nobody knows who, but it certainly wasn't Marie Antoinette, who lived 100 years before. So what happened? Propaganda. Revolutionary propagandists needed to paint the queen as a heartless, out of reach. It was useful. It served stories. It's calling someone's names. We have a president of the United States now that has taken this up, calling people names, making up names to belittle them. And he said it first. He wants us to believe them. She was executed based on a quote she never said. Never. You see, words matter. False attributions matter. And the speed at which a powerful story travels versus the slowness of a careful correction hasn't changed here on TikTok. Bubba Mice's lives and stories are circulating here on TikTok before truth can even lace up its sneakers. You have to stop it. We have to stop believing the first thing someone says on TikTok. We have to stop promoting and sending these things. We have a responsibility. I know you don't like it, because that would mean doing something. I don't like to do anything. I want to believe the person teaching me did the research. Don't do that. In fact, I don't want you to believe me. Don't. Look it up. That's the beauty of Google, the beauty of the internet. You can check everything I'm saying. Please, I'm comfortable with that because I know what I'm telling you is truth. The world moves so fast. None of us have the time or energy to research or look things up. The Talmud takes this into consideration. It's important for us to listen to what they're saying. Don't take one witness. Look for corroboration. Cross-examine the one witness. Ask about bias. Not every story that travels fast is traveling true. Only us can stop that and stop resending the lies, the Bubba mices. But none of this is willful. It's not that there's a conspiracy. We're tired. We're bombarded with lots of stuff. You know that George Washington never had wooden teeth. He had dentures, but they were made from ivory, from hippopotamus, elephant tusks, human teeth, and animal teeth. He wrote that they were extremely uncomfortable, deeply unpleasant, but they were not wooden. At some point, some newspaper, someone wrote George Washington had wooden teeth and would love to believe it because that's kind of neat. The Great Wall of China is not visible from space. It's very long, but it's only 15 to 30 feet wide. Thinner than most interstates, autobahns. The myth started in the 1930s. Think about it. The myth that you could see the Great Wall of China from space was started long before we went into space. Medieval people didn't think the earth was flat. No, this was not controversial. The ancient Greeks had figured this out years ago. The flat earth medieval people myth, it's a myth, was invented in the 19th century by writers who wanted the church to look bad and people who followed the church to look bad. It was pure and simple propaganda. You know, you're right. Sometimes people believe that their lives aren't interesting enough. And so they want to gravitate. They want to believe. They want to promote. Your life is very interesting. Unfortunately, it's not James Bond, Marilyn Monroe. It's not that. It is, however, very interesting. Einstein never failed math. Never. In fact, he excelled at mathematics. He failed French language and some botany classes. But he never failed mathematics. So, why does all of this matter? Why should we care the Vikings didn't wear horned helmets, Napoleon was not short, and Maria Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake"? Because the mechanism that produced those myths is the same mechanism on TikTok, YouTube today. So someone needs to sell tickets. So they make the costumes more dramatic. Someone needs to win a war. So they make the enemy ridiculous. Someone needs to fire up a revolution. So they fabricate a quote. Someone needs to erase another culture to tell the story without them. And unfortunately, as time passes, the propaganda version, the version that left people out, that becomes the one that everyone knows. Our expression in Yiddish is falsehood has no legs to stand on. It can't sustain itself in the long run. But the truth is, falsehood has very good legs. We see it here on TikTok all the time. It can run fast, just not far. And it takes real effort, courage, intellectual humility to chase it down and correct it. I don't want you to think that nothing is true and everything is a lie. That's not true. It's not true. The lesson is we need to be good witnesses to history. Ask who's telling the story. Why are they telling the story? To sell you a product? To convince you that there's something to give you more hair? To make your skin better? To make you attractive to other people? The Vikings were skilled sailors and traders who built extraordinary society. The cowboy heritage is a beautiful tapestry of Mexican, Native American, and frontier culture. Napoleon, a brilliant, ruthless, historical, significant man of average height. Marie Antoinette was a human being whose reputation was shaped as much by political necessity as by anything she actually did. Well, if you have a myth, a legend in history, email it to me. I'll research it for you. If you don't want to take the time to research it, I'll do it for you. Or, if you'd like to co-host, rabbiblock@hotmail.com. You can co-host with me. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.